Welcome, everybody. Manhattan has always been a gathering and trading place for many indigenous peoples, where nations intersected from all four directions since time immemorial. It was a place to gather and sometimes to seek refuge during times of conflict and struggle. The Association of Performing Arts Professionals pays respect to all of their ancestors, past, present, to their future generations. We acknowledge that our conference is situated on the island of Manhattan, or Mannahatta, traditional lands of the Munsee, Lenape, the Canarsie, Unkachug, Matinecock, Regawunk, Shinnecock, and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. We respect that many indigenous peoples continue to live and work on this island and acknowledge their ongoing contributions to this area.
Welcome, everyone. It's Saturday, and you're here for the morning plenary. Good on you. We're going to continue to celebrate our resurrection as a field and the strength we gain from our connections to each other.
It is so good to see you all here. It is a gift to see friends and colleagues we have missed these last few years. We also want to welcome those who cannot be here and who are joining us online, and a special welcome to our new colleagues.
This morning, we are going to hear from advocacy leaders from across the U.S. who fought to save our stages, laying out a roadmap for the future in the process. But
first, we are very fortunate to have something special to share with you. Those of you who have come to APAP NYC in pre-pandemic years may remember our always popular 5 Minutes to Shine program, in which colleagues told us about fabulous projects in a compact 5-minute format. 5 Minutes to Shine is especially dear to my heart because when our agency first introduced the Hipley ballerinas to this market, I encouraged their founder, Homer Hans Bryant, to submit his own story of how he started a classical ballet studio in underserved areas of Chicago by combining rap music and ballet. And then his story was selected. So I love this program and I love what it does to share stories and encourage innovation to the field.
So, almost 10 years ago, APAP piloted this storytelling session called 5 Minutes to Shine to highlight our members and their shining moments in their work across the country and the field. We thought it would be a one-shot deal, but it became such a popular session and an opportunity for people to tell their stories and share their knowledge. We are pleased to be bringing 5 Minutes to Shine back this year. In fact, we'll feature 4 curated stories, 2 at the start of the plenary sessions today and 2 on Sunday. You're in for a treat. This year's story, 5 minutes each, showcase tales of invention, reinvention, determination, and aspiration from our members. We begin today with Meg Booth, the president and CEO of Performing Arts Houston in Houston, Texas. Please welcome Meg.
Good morning. It's so nice to be with you live today. How do you survive a pandemic and still get your New Works program off the ground? 3 years ago, we were building a new strategic plan, and the future was very much top of mind. For many years, our organization, which was then known as Society for the Performing Arts, had commissioned new work from internationally renowned artists like Philip Glass and AIM by Kyle Abraham. But our city was right there around us, thriving, and we had not yet supported new work by Houston artists. Before COVID, there were independent artists and mid-size ensembles in Houston making great work that was not being presented or performed in the city's large historic halls, and we needed to change that. So we designed New Now, the Houston Artist Commissioning Project, to commission and present new works by Houston artists. Then enter the pandemic. So we started, and it started with digital, like messages from outer space. We commissioned artists within our city to create virtual work in the fall of 2020. We never intended to start it as a pilot digital program, and yet that's how it happened. I'd like to share 2 artists that we commissioned so far in this, and let's start the images. All of the images you'll see are of the new works that we created. When we started the virtual commissions in 2020, Deborah Deep Mouton here was just finishing a 2-year appointment as Houston's Poet Laureate. Already skilled with words, the virtual commission she created was her first opportunity to pair her words with visual elements. Her virtual commission, Hold the Light, was so strong that when we launched phase 2 of our program, which was a return to live theater, we enthusiastically awarded her one of our 6 commissions for performance on the Jones Hall stage. In fall of 2021, The World's Intermission was Deborah's directorial debut in a performance. She was very apprehensive about getting it right, and it took a lot of conversation and late nights in the theater to get the nuances of staging done and get her ready for her world premiere. But collaborating with Deborah showed us that this was how this project provides an access point for emerging artists to push forward and expand their voice. And our commissions helped her to prepare for her biggest work yet, which was Plum Sugar, The Rise of Lauren Anderson, which was produced by one of Houston's theater company's stages in the fall of 2022. You're seeing now images from Harrison Guy, who has long been a leader in Houston's contemporary art scene. His Urban Souls Dance Company is a social organization that creates community with dance, education, and advocacy, focusing on the history of Houston's Black community. A project long in dreams and development, his dance theater story, Colored Carnegie, and these are images of that, tells the history of Houston's first Black library, which is a celebration, it was a celebration of triumph in the face of adversity. His journey to create the work had started well before the pandemic, but Harrison had never found the funding or the stage to see the project to completion. We jumped at the opportunity to support him and provide the necessary funding and support to present this work on Jones Hall. It's a remarkable work of inspiration, which is terribly uplifting. Today, our organization is known as Performing Arts Houston. We dropped the word society from our name and have a cool new logo to boot. New now, the Houston Artist Commissioning Project is in its sophomore year. We are proud to play a supporting role in the fabric of our community by giving artists the opportunity to create and perform in Houston's theater district. This work is from and about our rich community and communities. We are one with many. New Now is the beginning of a 50-year-old presenting arts organization commissioning artists in our own backyard. New Now is the beginning of what we hope will be more inspiring works that connect and showcase the deep talent and stories in Houston. After surviving the pandemic, our current challenge is, how do you thrive and grow a new works program, amplifying the voices and the visibility of artists within our own community? Well, buoyed by the stories of artists like Deborah and Harrison, we enthusiastically work towards the answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meg. Such important work. Next up is Elise Patterson, founder, executive, and artistic director of Abilities Dance Incorporated in Brookline, Massachusetts. Please welcome Elise to the stage.
Hello. Let's get started, shall we? So, let's give some background here. My name is Elise. I'm the founder of Abilities Dance. I founded this organization when I was not able to find professional work as a disabled dancer in Boston, but also not seeing the stories that I wanted to share, and really kind of centering around this question of what happens when we take control of our own stories and our own voices, both in the artistry and also in the execution of these projects. And so in doing this, we faced a lot of adversity in our organization as we grew, from funding discrimination to not being seen disabled enough, to venues not being accessible and more, but we still persisted, we still grew, even with limited funds, even with no staff at all. And my director of music, Andrew, who is also a Asian neurodivergent, non-binary person, and I were discussing, what if we took control of these stories? What if we took a well-known ballet Firebird and made it so that our own identities are within the context of the story? And so we decided that if we applied for this grant and got it, we would go to work, and we did. So we went to work. Virtual work was already a part of our entity because we have artists across the country, as well as it just being a form of access. So internally, our methods didn't change, only externally and how we connected with the audience changed. And so over the course of 6 months, with artists across the country, we grew, we created this story completely virtually, complete scenes of a ballet, which is unheard of for most, but we did that. And we also incorporated things like masks that were a part of the costuming and our identities within the context of the story, such as like gender fluidity and celebrating Black, deaf, and disabled love. And all of these elements that we felt just weren't a part of ballet, that we made a part of ballet. And then Show Week, we all came together and put it up. And it was amazing because that was our first live stream show as well, since we wanted to have that live stream moment of everyone connecting, to just have that moment of unity and connection in a really hard time during the pandemic. And folks connected across the globe. And we had folks from Sri Lanka to Canada and Europe and all across the States as well, that were excited to not just be able to connect and see high quality art, but to see representation on stage as well, and to see how we're using that representation to push intersectional disability rights work in Boston and beyond. And so from that, we got a lot of success. We were able to access larger sources of funding as foundations, as well as the arts and sector community as a whole realized that we are able to do these amazing stories. And that led to dancers having benefits and being part-time, myself starting full-time and more. And it's just a testament to really own that work, as well as the next phase of what happens when, instead of retrofitting, we put ourselves in the story from the beginning. So what can you take from that? Dance never died. We always continued doing the work, but we had our own platform, as well as continue to do live stream, continue to do your events virtual, and to make it accessible for all of us, especially those of us who are high risk and aren't able to attend, is a part of that work too. So thank you.
Amazing. Elise, thank you so much for that incredible story. You are changing the world.
These stories are so inspiring. Join us again tomorrow at 11 o'clock back here for 2 more extraordinary stories from members Dan Fruit from Dan Fruit & Company in Los Angeles and Mark Wilson from Zellner Arts Center in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And now, welcome Jean Cook, David Holland, Nejin Lee, Jen Lyon, Jack Randall, and Claire Rice to share their thoughts about life after Shuttered Venues Operations Grant, or SVOG. Am I here? Yep.
All right, hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for this Saturday morning plenary, Life After SVOG. We're so happy for you to spend time with us this morning. My name is David Holland. I'm the Deputy Director of WESTAF, the Western States Arts Federation. I'm one of your co-facilitators for today, along with my colleague Claire Rice. So following up from Senator Schumer's rousing remarks yesterday, we're going to take a deeper dive into activism and advocacy in our field and hope to have a robust discussion that leaves you inspired and motivated to engage with your elected officials, engage in your communities, and do the work that we need to continue to do to build a thriving and equitable and just performing arts industry and wider creative economy. This morning, we will be using a software tool called Mentimeter, which I think a number of you may have used. And in a moment, I believe they're gonna put a QR code on the screen. We want this session to be interactive, even though we have so many people gathered in this room together today. And Mentimeter is one of the strategies that we'll have to enable us to do that. So using your phone, you can connect with Mentimeter using the QR code. And they'll be posting some questions on screen. You'll see it in the Mentimeter when you bring it up on your phone for you to answer. So there's some initial questions just to get a sense of who's in the room this morning. Then we'll be using Mentimeter later on in our program before we move into questions and answers toward the end of it. And so with that, I'm going to hand over to Claire.
Are we going to try one?
Yeah.
So yeah, feel free to answer these challenging Mentimeter questions. The first two are real doozies. And then we'll dive into, slightly more substantive content with Mentimeter later today. I'm Claire Rice. We'll do more formal introductions of the panel in just a minute, but I want to acknowledge, first of all, welcome everyone. There's going to be a lot more to cover today than we can handle, but we're really pleased that APAP is elevating this advocacy discussion in the big room today. I know there'll be a lot of follow-up on this as well through ongoing conversations and webinars. I think after the extraordinary challenges of the last few years, we have to harness the incredible advocacy success we've seen not only in DC, but in state capitals and city halls and county seats across the country. So thank you for taking your morning when you could have been doing other things or recovering from last night, to be here with us for this. I know we're all really tired after the last few years, particularly in the advocacy space, but this is the time for us to keep holding our government accountable to the value and the power of arts and culture. So after the historic victory of SVOG, we're going to talk about what's next in that space today. So I'm going to turn it to David to frame out our introductions and our panel.
All right. So we have a great cast this morning in terms of advocacy perspectives and different ways of approaching this work and engaging in the industry. And so we're going to have our panelists introduce themselves in just a moment, and I'm essentially going to model that for us. In addition to just giving you information that helps you know who we are, we're also going to talk a little bit about advocacy initiatives and coalitions that we're participating in, different projects that inspire us in the work that we're doing. And so I'll start. Again, I'm David Holland, the Deputy Director of the Western States Arts Federation. My preferred pronouns are he, him, his. I'm joining you today from Denver, Colorado, what is now known as Denver, Colorado, on the lands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute. I'm an African-American man wearing a blue shirt and a gray cardigan with basically a bald head and a clean-shaven face. So what inspires me at the moment, I have the pleasure in my role at West Staff in engaging in a range of advocacy coalitions across the country. We created one in our region, so I have to plug this, called the Western Arts Advocacy Network, which brings together arts advocacy organizations and advocates across our 13 states and now 3 Pacific jurisdictions. And it's a pleasure to have brought that group together. They were very active in our region in garnering support to the field in a time of crisis during the pandemic, and collectively requested and garnered almost $1 billion across the 13 states in our region during that time. The work of advocacy was very active and very pronounced during the pandemic. I also participate with Claire as one of the 3 co-chairs of the Creative States Coalition, a new coalition of state arts advocacy organizations and their partners and supporters, so state arts agencies, regional arts organizations, national arts service organizations that support their collective work, and also with Jean and Claire and part of something called the BIPOC-led Arts Advocacy Coalition. So very excited that new advocacy spaces have been generated during the pandemic, that new forms and styles of leadership and governance are being tested in those spaces, and that we have secured considerable support, but never enough support for the continued advancement of the work that we all do in this room. All right, so I've modeled that. I'm going to hand over to Claire to
Let's go down the line. Yeah.
All right, continue.
All right. Hey, everyone. I'm Jack Randall, president of the Curland Agency, and been at the company for going on 27 years, actually. Once upon a time was a commercial, but a presenter, to use APAP speak language, promoter in the commercial world. So I've been on the other side of the fence in terms of promoting shows. I'm also a co-founder and original and continuing board member of NITO, which stands for the National Independent Talent Organization, which is a group that was founded not long after the pandemic started, after NEVA, however, who inspired us to and made us realize that we had to form because we had a different NACIS code, which none of us even knew what that was in March of 2020. But we quickly learned, and we quickly realized that we were going to need help, and we formed. It started, reaching out to other. The whole thing started with a Zoom call, with no intention of forming as a group. It was completely by accident. And so we bandied together, we discovered we liked each other, and we realized that we needed to have our own voice, but we needed to, it was going to be a team effort, and we realized we needed a lobbyist. We all ponied up money. We hired someone. Our two biggest criteria was someone that understood what we did and how our businesses worked, and someone who played well in the sandbox with NEVA's lobbyist. And I think the end result and the end game showed that, we ended up making a pretty wise decision. So anyways, I'll kick it over and we'll continue on down the roll here.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jean Cook. I'm an artist. I use she, they pronouns. I'm from New York, Lenape, Canarsie land, and I'm a middle-aged Korean-American woman with salt and pepper, black hair, and bangs. Just noting the bangs. Nejin doesn't have bangs. So I'm an artist and an advocate. I spent over a decade at Future of Music Coalition, a research, education, and advocacy organization representing the interests of independent musicians. So while that organization, Future of Music Coalition, worked closely with congressional staff to advise them on pending legislation and the impact of pending legislation on independent artists, they also work just as much with regulatory agencies. And so about how to implement the laws that get passed. So we worked with the FCC, with the Department of Justice, with the Copyright Office, and the White House, among others. The purpose of, and just to think about how to place Future Music Coalition in an ecosystem, FMC built bridges and coalitions, and then we conducted research to fill gaps. So those were some of the unique roles that we played in the ecosystem. And some of the research that we did included gathering and interpreting the most comprehensive data set about musicians' income in the United States to date. So that was a huge that was a huge gap in terms of policymakers' understanding of the music industry. They had heard most of what they understood about the music industry from the major record labels, who actually don't understand a lot about how musicians live. And so the last 3 years, I have also worked with Music Workers Alliance as a member leader. MWA works democratically, so instead of telling you my own words, I'm just going to read you what MWA is about. So MWA is an organization is an organization of, by, and for independent music workers. MWA's shared purpose is to empower music workers by engaging in collective action to create a community where music is valued financially and culturally, and music workers benefit and achieve dignity in their lives. So MWA's, thank you. MWA's priorities are to fight for music workers at their federal, state, and city level for access to benefits and fair protections. Another priority is economic justice and fair working conditions for music workers in live venues and recorded music settings. Economic justice in the digital domain. And then also looking at social justice and culture shift and ways of righting wrongs and leveling the playing field for everybody in the music field. Regarding a new structure or advocacy structure or initiative that I'm excited about, I can mention, we did the Mentimeter thing Can we show the results, Alicia, of the Mentimeter? Because I think we did ask who is in the room and who you are. It'd be great to take a look at it just for a second, if that's possible. And the reason why is because I want to make sure I know if there are artists in this room. Because if you're an artist and you're from New York State, then you would want to know that there is a seed fund that was launched by New York State. It was to support new businesses formed between 2018 and now, which means that if you don't already have a DBA and a business bank account, you can make one now, and in 3 months after putting your expenses through the business bank account, you can apply $5,000 grants. They've got $200 million. This is for any arts worker in New York State. If you want to know more about it, go to Music Workers Alliance. That's going to be my takeaway too. I know we're going to do takeaways at the end of this, but I'm going to remind you again. But you should know, if you live in New York State, you're an independent arts worker, you've been losing money, you want to get some money from the state, you should sign up for that. So that's amazing.
My name is Jen Lyon. I'm part of the National Independent Venue Association on the Advocacy Committee, and I'm the president of the New York chapter. We have about 300 members in New York and about, well, it might even be 4,000 or so nationally now. In my role, I was part of kind of the original group that all got together to figure out what to do in March, was it, right? When we all shut down and tried to figure out our lives. And in particular in New York, my role was really working with Schumer's office to figure out how to, well, if I may be so very blunt, to kind of figure out how to get him what he needed so we could get what we needed, So there was a lot of trading favors, if you will, and there was a lot of email blasts, and there was a lot of tweets, and there was a lot of Instagram posts and tracking. And I think the big thing I think about from that time was how amazing it was to have a group of individuals who'd never worked together, for-profit and nonprofit, some of us who'd done a bunch of advocacy work and some of us who'd done none, but we all were insatiable because you have to be in this industry, and relentless, and you have to be in this industry. And to harness all of that and to figure out how to organize and figure out how to fund a lobbyist and do all of that, I think is so telling about the passion that comes with presenting shows. And I think we're just all lucky to be connected now because we weren't. So, at this point, we have a full chapter system, which I encourage anyone to join. So every, region or state has their own. We have an annual conference now. This will be our second year. And we're now really collectively working on initiatives that would affect all of us as ticket sellers and as folks who present arts and artists.
Hi, I'm Nejin Lee. I'm the Director of Government Affairs at the League of American Orchestras. I use she, her pronouns, and I am doubling the middle-aged Asian, specifically Korean representation on this panel. My role in the ecosystem is primarily, I would say, representing orchestras, but I think what a lot of people outside maybe the Beltway don't know is that my organization is part of a larger coalition. It's an informal group called the Cultural Advocacy Group, and we've been involved with that for longer than I've been at the League, so I think probably 20 years plus. And we primarily focus on federal arts policy, a whole range of them, so not just federal funding for the arts, but eligibility for the arts and things like education, policies that could have a detrimental or positive impact in other federal agencies and so on. One thing I would say, and this is going to echo a lot of what you've already heard, is I've been excited to see the growth of the sandbox. I think the sandbox got bigger, and the people who have been coming to, I don't know if play is quite the right word, it's definitely been work, but the people who have been involved, that expansion of the voices has been really exciting. It's been interesting. We definitely need a combination, I think, of experienced and new voices. And the blending together of the ideas and sort of marrying that with implementation and some of the looking out for the details, it is complicated, but it's been really rewarding. And I think what we've all been inspired by is to see the power of collective action. I know that's something Claire's really excited about too. So I just look forward to, kind of everyone working out together how our role in this ecosystem is important, how it can support each other, and there is room for all of us.
Thanks, Nejin. So yes, I'm Claire Rice. I run an organization called Arts Alliance Illinois, which is the statewide advocacy, policy, and service organization that amplifies the impact of the creative industries across Illinois, based in Chicago, which is the land of the Council of the Three Fires of Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi. I'm a middle-aged, it's real, white woman with brown hair. And really happy to be here with all of you. I mean, my advocacy and policy are my full-time job. I mean, for many of us up here, that is not true, right? We squeeze it in when we have time, or maybe when we don't have time, when the needs are urgent. And I'm sure that is also true for a lot of you in this room. I think, like Nejin and others have said, the expansion of who's been involved in advocacy and policy conversations across our field in the last 3 years is really encouraging. The new coalitions that are coming out of, kind of the toss-up of advocacy work in the last few years is really exciting. Coalitions like the Creative States Coalition and the BIPOC-led Arts Advocacy Coalition. And then I will say, just build on what Nejin just said, the fact that we have folks up here representing the for-profit sector, individual artists, nonprofits, statewide organizations, local organizations, national organizations, like this is the time for us to continue that unifying collective action work. And it's really hard, right? Because we're all going to disagree about a lot of stuff. And it's hard to find those issues that unify the sector, particularly in the ways, that huge buckets of money have been able to unify the sector in amazing ways in the last 3 years. And we don't have that same opportunity moving forward. The money is not going to be as large, but I do believe that there are issues that we can continue to work on together, and we can continue to do that work through the lens of justice and equity. So with that, yes, Jean.
I think the Mentimeter thing is ready to show just who's in the audience.
Oh, great. Show us who's in the room. Great. Let's see some Mentimeter results before we move on. If we can. Yes, there they are. Is this thing on? Somebody said, not clear, not clear. We'll see. You guys let us know throughout if the answer to that changes.
Oh, I can't see.
And then, it's tough for me to see here, but okay. We do, folks who consider themselves artists, great, some funders. I would love to see that advocacy number expand, right? We should get to all of us considering ourselves advocates by the end of the day. Great, super helpful. And please continue to take this. We're going to come back to the next set of results right before the Q&A. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm gonna lean into some questions that deal with what's happening right now in terms of advocacy and policy that's moving either at the state or federal level that folks are excited about, what all these people are working on in terms of the advocacy space at the moment. And I will say that even though Jean's example talked about something that was New York specific, I mean, one of the things that these new coalitions are doing is starting to unify and learn, so we can learn from each other better, right? So we can figure out, how did they do that in New York? Is that something that could work in redder states, purpler states, other states? Can we make that happen? So some of these coalitions and conversations, and even the conversation we're having today, is part of that learning. So I am going to turn to David even to start us off about what some of your top advocacy priorities are for the performing arts currently, and what are you working on now that this audience needs to be a part of?
All right, thanks, Claire. So I'm not going to take a lot of time to describe what West Staff does, but one of the things that we do is advocacy. We also do a lot of work, I should say advocacy and policy. We also do a lot of grant making and work in sector development, and we also run a technology enterprise, like a social enterprise, and provide services to a range of artists and arts organizations, arts administrators around the country. So on the policy front, one thing we're doing is, in a couple weeks, we'll be taking a delegation from our 13 states and 3 Pacific jurisdictions to Washington to meet with members of Congress. This is relatively early in the session, and we'll be talking to a lot of members that are considering their legislative agenda and opportunities in this Congress. One of the items that pertains to the performing arts is something called PAGPA, which I think everyone in this room probably knows about, the Performing Artists Tax Parity Act, that was introduced in the last Congress. The indication is it will be reintroduced again in this Congress. And so that's one area in which there is specific and targeted legislation to support, in this case, performing artists, and make it easier for them to do their work by taking advantage of tax advantages. So that's one specific initiative, and it's tied to our legislative advocacy work. But what I'd say about the work that West Staff does is that we are concerned about that, we engage in doing that work, but we are concerned about equity and systems change, and so we do try to work at different levels with different players, and not only organized around the engagement of elected officials. Working with the National Endowment for the Arts, the Western Arts Alliance, and our regional arts organization partners, like in this region, Mid-Atlantic Arts, we have for the last couple of years been responsible for the management of a program called Performing Arts Discovery that aims to provide opportunities for performing artists in international markets. That's actually a long-standing program of the National Endowment for the Arts. It was previously supported by the Mellon Foundation as well. We re-geared it in the last couple of years to really prioritize providing access to those types of opportunities for artists that may not have had those kind of opportunities before. So specifically BIPOC artists and LGBTQ artists, and that focus continues. More recently, we received a grant from the International Trade Association in partnership with the Western Arts Alliance to expand that program and actually go on trade missions. And this program was the first arts program to ever receive this funding. So we'll be doing trade missions in international markets to provide opportunities for artists in those international markets, and still forwarding the equity considerations that I mentioned before. So that's another example of our work in a very different way, in a programmatic way. We also have a performing arts touring program called Tour West that we're looking to expand, deepen, and strengthen, because we're very much aware that the performing arts industry in our region is still facing a lot of disruption and dislocation, and so we want to facilitate and support opportunities for regional touring in our region and across the country using those funds. So those are some of the work that we're doing right at the moment.
Jack, why don't you tell us what NITO is thinking about working on these days?
Okay. I feel I need to back up for a second and say I'm a Caucasian male from Dearborn, Michigan. I'm wearing all black today to mirror my soul, and I have a lot of hair, and it's all real. Okay, so NITO, we are still, in many ways, we're still, we just had a membership meeting yesterday down in the concourse, and we're still figuring it out in some ways. One thing is I would say that it seems, I believe most of the membership would be in favor of, is at the very least, transparency of ticket fees, service fees. So that's definitely an issue, concerns, or at least some of us concerns about the amount or the percentages of those things. So that's a work in progress. I would also say one of the things we've done is for a lot of our artists who, you know, for the most part are not stadium acts, you know, and most not arena acts, you know, affordable cancellation insurance that they can get, you know, policies. You're not going to be insured against things being canceled for COVID, but for weather, those types of things, there are policies out there available. We've also been exploring, you know, trying to get a better, you know, medical health insurance for musicians and their, you know, their working staffs, the crews, et cetera, you know, that kind of thing. So, you know, we're still, in many ways, trying to figure out what our next major, you know, certainly in terms of like, you know, if we're talking about something trying to get into, you know, law, again, we're still admittedly figuring it out, you know.
Yep, that's real. Jen, you want to talk a little bit about NEVA's
Yes,
work?
sure. We're working on, just to say from the outset, I think one of the reasons I'm very involved in NEVA is that I think we're really focused on transparency in the industry and creating better dialogue, just to say is an overarching piece that I think is really exciting, because that hasn't, in a lot of our spaces, that hasn't been the goal, right? The first goal. So our big push right now on the policy side is looking at secondary ticketing resellers, which there's so many issues in ticketing right now. We were talking about it a little earlier on all different levels. The fees, how they're being resold, who owns the ticketing, what happens when someone else happens. So we're working really heavy this year on addressing that issue in a larger way with the government, and I'm hoping everyone can engage with us as we get a little farther along in that piece. So that's pretty exciting. And I think that that piece also then starts to approach, it touches on the larger issues of, we're independent, and who else is out there, and what are their powers and ownership, and how do we all play in that, right? So I think what's interesting is, as we're finding little policies, we're starting to be able to push on the larger dynamics in our industry and the larger ways that finances happen and artists get paid and all those things. So that's a piece with ticketing. We're working on nuts and bolts things that our industry needs, like health insurance and commercial liability insurance, and creating a way to have group buys, and just how do we make this more affordable as an industry? How do we come together and figure out how to edge everything down and edge other things up? So the insurance piece is really big for us as well. We all know how insurance is just, and now it's even worse now. Like in New York, our rates are just out of control. So as a local group, we're able to now, we have a lobbyist, and we can now figure out how to engage with the state around that, which is, I think, the probably third thing that we're really working on, which is sharing information. How did Oregon get grants for independent presenters and venues, and New York didn't? What happens there, and why is the government structure different? And sharing tips and experience and knowledge around how to shift our industry within each state, since it's so different. So that piece for us has been revolutionary, to be able to say, oh, well, Nashville has funding now for a study. Let's do that in New York, because maybe then we can get a little farther along. We've never had that opportunity, so that's power, right? And for most of us, we're up there. Have just been kind of grinding for how many years, and we're competing with larger entities, publicly traded companies, and multinational companies. And this ability for us to share information and data, you can really see that the future of that would be better business, just all along the way, which just means that more artists are presented, more equity is happening. So it's exciting. It's exciting.
Now, Jen, you want to close us out on this one?
Sure. So every year, my organization and the coalitions that I'm in, we're juggling about a dozen policy issues, but one that I'll mention that's very top of mind right now is specific to visa processing. And anyone who engages a guest artist that's from outside the US, you have filed a visa before, or hopefully you have. And that's an expensive and complicated prospect. So if you've done it before, you know what I'm talking about. And last week in the Federal Register, the Department of Homeland Security has posted a proposal to more than triple the fee for O&P visas. So we've got 3 months to respond, and we're already at work trying to strengthen the talking points we've used before. But I'll say, kind of going back to the opening of what I'm excited about, I'm really looking forward to tapping into this larger body of advocates, so we can start collecting stories of impact, the threat, what it would cost artistically as well as financially, and how our sector has already weathered a very severe financial storm. So we're not in a position to be basically taking on not just a filing fee to cover increased costs to process our own, but part of the proposal would be to divide another program fee among filers of 2 of the forms. And one of those forms is the one that arts petitioners use. So stay tuned. I guess maybe this is kind of getting a little bit into the parting action later, but yeah, for anyone who gets involved in visa filing, that is something to definitely be on the watch for later this year. And we're watching it, we're already starting our talking points, and we are going to be getting in touch to, let you know how you can participate and what you can uniquely bring forward to help us push back against this as much as we possibly can.
Thanks.
All right, so I'm gonna move us into another type of conversation that might build on some of the comments that we've been making so far. And my question is, how is your advocacy work, or how is the advocacy work that you've seen happening, how is that bent toward equity and justice in recent years? And where are we still failing? Where are we still seeking to inspire? What are the opportunities to further advance that work? And I'm gonna start with Jean.
Oh, okay. So I have a few observations that I'd like to share of ways that I've seen the field shift. And there's also, I only have 3 minutes, and there's so much context I want to give you. So I have to think about this for a second. So I guess one thing that I'll say, and there's a lot about the advocacy world that reflects the constituencies that the advocates are working on behalf of. The culture isn't always that different, right? So when we're talking about bending towards justice and equity work, we've seen, a lot of bending in the last few years. And I'm really excited to see how much of that's going to stick and how much of this work is going to lead to enduring change. 3 things that I feel like are good signs would be that in the arts world, you see more of a layering of a power analysis and power mapping happening in kind of how people are acknowledging and understanding the space. So a specific example would be in recognizing the difference in experience between the needs of artists versus the needs of organizations, right? So when the pandemic hit, organizations were like, we need funding, and artists we need unemployment to work, 2 very different kinds of needs. And also I think more and more in the advocacy space, what I was seeing is an acknowledgement that the trickle-down theory, that if you fund the venues, that everybody else in the arts world is also going to be benefiting. So I think more pushing back on the trickle-down theory, especially on the artist side. Somebody was asking me recently about the seed fund that I was talking about in my opening. And this isn't a fund that's just available everywhere. This is a fund that music workers fought for in New York State. And the reason why they fought for it was because there were a bunch of artists that were going on tour in Europe, things were getting canceled. You guys were talking about insurance and stuff like that. We definitely need more insurance products. But on the other hand, we also needed relief, because there were artists going there, things get canceled, someone got a positive test, the band leader has to bear the brunt of the costs. And where are you going to turn to? All the relief funding was gone. The Music Workers Alliance went and was like, let's talk to foundations. They were giving us relief money, maybe they'll help us, but they're like, oh no, we're not doing that anymore, we're moving on to other things. And then we went to the state, and we said to the state, we need help. And not only do we need help, we need you to work with us to make sure the system works. Because with PPP, which I know people were really excited that individuals could apply for PPP, but you had to be set up in a certain way. You had to be able to get in line at a right time to be able to access it. We found, Music Workers Alliance did some research and found that 11% of music workers were able to access PPP, but more than twice that applied, right? And so there's a gap there. And so that was also built into the idea of the seed fund, that it should be made available to music workers, even if they're not already set up to do that. Give them time, give them a runway, let them get their DBA, let them get their business bank account, spend some money so you can get those funds. So anyway, a power map, so recognizing the need for more data that centers the experience of those who've fallen between the cracks, that's a big gap that I think people are seeing more of and trying to meet. And then I guess another trend that I'm seeing is recognizing the role that access to capital plays in the ability of artists to get started and to stay working as artists, right? If you don't have access to that capital and the pandemic hits, your savings is gone. Can you afford to continue to be an artist? So that's also something that we're hearing more of in the discourse. And in the course of that, when you look at what are the policy solutions that help to support a more diverse set of artists who are working who may not have access to capital. You know, I think that the emphasis on social safety net and thinking about how does our unemployment system work, how come it doesn't work for people who have a mix of W-2 and 1099s? Can we fix that? Something, you know, like only 30% of people who are unemployed were able to access unemployment before the pandemic, and now we've had this experience and we're like, oh, the system doesn't work. This is a moment, right? Like, what are we gonna do about that? We have a lot of learning and we have the ability to do things. So like when I think about looking into the future, about what do we do with the fact that we have all these new kinds of advocates, there's a whole layer of work that we can now do based on our experience to make these systems better, that I really hope that we put effort towards. So I guess the last thing that I'll also say is just kind of like breaking down silos between arts and other community groups, which I think is so key, especially from an artist perspective, thinking about the social safety net issues. The arts aren't the only ones who noticed that unemployment didn't work, right? There are people who've been working to reform unemployment for many, many years. And I think that there's a danger of staying too close into our silos. That's one of the things I'm really excited about. Like, Nita's thinking about insurance, Neva's thinking about insurance. There are other folks who are also thinking about insurance, and we're interested in collaborating. That's so critical. We need to also collaborate outside of the arts. Because when there was relief funding flowing, as one example in New York State, when people are like, oh, there's $100 million that's gonna be at NYSCA, let's figure out how the arts community is gonna work together to distribute that money. A lot of energy is going there. Meanwhile, the New York City Immigrant Coalition is seeing that there's a huge need and that unemployment isn't meeting people's, meeting the need for the moment. And they're going and getting $2.4 billion for what they called the Excluded Workers Fund. We were able to benefit from that, but why weren't we in conversation with them in the first place? They've been doing this work for decades to try and help people who need access to social safety net things. So those are some threads, like in terms of like trends that I'm seeing, like the power analysis stuff, more power mapping, looking at the access that the role of capital plays in the ability of artists to be artists and to stay artists, and the breaking down of silos, opportunities to work with other kinds of movements outside of just the arts. And then when it comes to where we're failing, and I guess, I mean, it's not that we're failing, we're learning, right? So like we've learned a lot, and we're trying to be better, but there's some real challenges. And for that, I know I've run out of time, so I'll just very briefly say that there was a New York Times article, op-ed, that referred to a piece that came out by Maurice Mitchell, who's the head of the Working Family Parties Fund, that was talking about movements, like how to build sustainable movements. What are the things that are challenging organizations from being resilient, who are working towards justice and equity within an organization? I don't know, for those of you who are really active in movement stuff, like I guess like a year ago there was an article in The Intercept called The Elephant in the Zoom that was talking about like these organizations that are pledging to work towards equity and justice, but internally had a lot of work to do, and staff was becoming more and more aware of the disconnect between their internal culture and the change that they're looking to affect in the world, and what does that mean? And you know, all these organizations are now looking inwards. You see it with museums are starting to unionize. Like there's a lot of organizations that are trying to figure out like, how do I sustain this commitment towards equity that I've made? It's causing a lot of discord within the organization. It's causing discord within our community and within our memberships. And like, we're trying to figure out how to talk about this and be smart about how we move through this difficult phase. And so I would just refer you guys to that article. Maurice Mitchell, he's done a really great diagnosis. There's like 10 different ways that organizations working towards equity are falling into traps. Like, and not getting, you're getting stuck in different places in your equity conversations. And so there's great diagnosis and there's some tools there. It really has an organization frame, but I think that the diagnosis can be useful for everyone. So that's a resource that I wanted to make sure that you guys were aware of when it comes to this kind of work.
How about you, Claire?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add briefly to what Jean said about capitalization. Like, I think one of the barriers, I mean, yes, and to everything Jean said on the positive side as we're thinking about equity and justice in this work particularly. But I think there's a huge barrier to entry in terms of capacity, right? because in terms of our BIPOC organization, many of our BIPOC organizations, many of our smaller scale and independent organizations, collectives, artists, like people don't have time to do this work. People feel like they don't have time to do this work, the advocacy work, the policy work. People don't have the training, they don't have the money. There's just a big, I think, capacity issue to be able to engage in this conversation in a meaningful way, and so that I think is still a challenge for us as we think about moving some of these structures forward in a sustainable way. We're gonna kind of close out the. If we don't get a lot of questions, we have a couple more questions we can grapple with up here. But let's close out this panel and then turn to dialogue with you and maybe some of the Mentimeter questions, which might spur some further questions from you all. But so just kind of a rapid response down the panel. What's the number one thing you want people to leave here and do to advance creative sector advocacy in their community? And so I'll start. It's deeply self-interested, but I want you to get to know your state arts advocacy organization in your state. If you don't already, I want you to have a relationship with them. If one doesn't exist, I want you to call me, and I want to talk about how we build one, because that is part of the work of the Creative States Coalition. So find out who they are, see what they're working on, see how you can collaborate with them, and what they can do for you.
So we didn't really talk a lot about the fact that there's a new Congress in session. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I think the number one thing everyone should do is to talk to your members of Congress. If you haven't before, now is 100% the time to introduce yourself. They're new. They'll have a better chance of remembering you right now. And don't just make it a one-time introduction. Ideally, you're not talking to them with an ask right away. You're letting them know who you are, and you're asking them some questions too. So try to find out what their priorities are and make a schedule to just keep in touch with them a few times throughout the year, especially if it's a member that you don't think is arts friendly. That is a relationship that needs work. The champions are going to keep doing their work, and they should be thanked. And we need to do a good job of remembering to thank them. But the people who are opposed, their minds can be changed when they learn that they have constituents who work in the arts, when they see what the impact is economically and so on. So those relationships are 1,000 times more effective when they're coming from constituents rather than from hired lobbyists. We all have a role to play, but that's what I would want everyone to do.
I think I would like to acknowledge that SVOG was the largest arts grant in the history of the US, and I think this is an opportunity for all of us as an industry. And I know we're back in it, and it's different now than it was last year, and a lot of us are really struggling to figure out money and shows and selling tickets and all the things, right? And funding. But I think we need to be energized to challenge ourselves to do better as an industry. And I think that's what this opportunity is. And I think that we need to look at ourselves as individuals, look at our organizations, figure out where our fear lies, figure out how to disrupt that fear, and think about our counterparts in other countries and how they get to operate and what do we want ultimately for ourselves as an industry. And in the nation and then in our individual locations, how do we align ourselves with other major industries to be able to access and create just a stronger industry as a whole, better practice, and a better way to treat ourselves, our artists, our audiences, and the millions of individuals we all interact with as an industry.
Could the artists raise their hands? I'd love to see you in the room. And you guys should look around. These people are probably showcasing this week, and you probably really like their work. But for those of you artists who are here, if you're in the dance community, we're talking about data gaps, Dance NYC I think is still doing a census. You can go and talk about your experience so they can help to aggregate that and advocate for what you need. So that's something a resource that those from the dance community should know about. For those of you who are interested in learning more about the Seed Fund, go to musicworkersalliance.org. They have a New York State Seed Fund link. It's got more information than you'll ever want to know about how it works and what the steps are. go get that money. And then I think also, like for New York State folks, I'm very New York City and New York State folks, because that's where my head is nowadays when it comes to advocacy. But also for theater people, the League of Independent Theaters is also a really great resource for you to know about. All three of these organizations, Dance NYC, League of Independent Theaters, and Music Workers Alliance, they have lists. You can sign up for them, you can follow them on social media, learn about what they're learning, and also, like in the case of Music Workers Alliance, if you're a music worker, you can consider joining and just tell them what you need. They have accountability and community safety committee that's really helping with individual artists, because it's so hard. You don't have an employer. Who do you do your sexual harassment claims to? It's like you can go to MWA. There are people there who really want to help. And so just thinking about ways that you can band together with others to make sure that your collective voice is heard and to build power. I think that this is a real, it's a real moment for that. And so I really encourage you to just do the little thing to follow just to get started down the path if you're not already connected to these organizations.
I've got 3 points that I would say. One, in looking in the short past, I'm like living, walking proof. I tell people your voice can really matter in our country, right? So I encourage people to, to fight, organize and fight for whatever causes or beliefs or things that they want to fight for. I think the next thing I would say, which is both looking in the past and looking in the future, is whatever commonality we can find amongst our organizations and for the betterment of our industry and hopefully for the betterment of our society and planet even, is to one of I think, and I don't hear a lot of people talk about this when you talk about the post-SVOG thing. We got a really lucky break in 2020, folks. COVID wasn't a lucky break, but the fact that it happened in an election year, I'm not sure we'd be here right now if that hadn't happened. There was 61 senators that signed on in support of that bill, and I guarantee you, most of the ones that had an R after their name wouldn't have signed up if they were up for re-election. If you go back and look at the list, virtually, not all, there was some that didn't, but almost all the Republicans that signed on in support were up for re-election that year. Wasn't a coincidence. So guess what next year is, folks? It's an election year. We've got a year to get it together and figure it out in the short term. And the last thing that I'll say in the long game, for all of us, anybody that has anything to do with this industry, music education. That's the farm team for what we're all gonna together. But it's also, if you drill down and you look at the data of what successful performing arts and music education programs are in the public schools, it's mind-blowing what it does for society and the benefits. It's just like a ripple effect, and I would venture to say what's happened in our country in the last 6, 7, 8 years is in part a lack of education problem, right? So that's my final thought.
All right, I'll be brief because we really want to provide some opportunity for you to interact with us and ask questions and see what's happening on the Mentimeter as well. So I'll organize my thoughts into 3 areas, and this is a framework that we often use when we talk about our work when we're working with different groups around the country doing coalition work. And that is that you can do more than one of these, but people often find themselves more in the role of a policymaker. So you're making decisions about where resources flow, making decisions about the rules and everything that shapes our lives. You're an advocate, so you have causes and issues, and you are taking meetings with elected officials. You're actively engaged in campaigns or sometimes passively engaged in campaigns. Or you're more an activist, and you're really inspired by a cause, and you're fighting toward the world that you want to see, regardless of whether that's connected to formal systems and meeting with elected officials or not. I think it's important for all of us to think about where we sit in that space and how we want to devote our time. I think that advocacy can actually have a low barrier to entry, and a lot of folks on this panel, including myself, have mentioned a lot of groups. I'd encourage you, as others have, to learn more about those groups and decide what groups you want to be part of. Being part of can be as simple as going on their website, signing up for their newsletter, and when they send that thing where you can click through and send a letter to your member of Congress or to your state elected official or local elected official that they've already written for you and you just have to add your name or whatever notes, I'd encourage you to at least do that. At least do that. It's been made so easy to do. It now even can be done on your mobile phone or anywhere. You can do it on the go. If you feel inspired, I definitely encourage you, like Nejin was saying, to make time to meet with your electeds and build relationships with them. Those relationships are vital to us. And as has been said, lobbyists can do a lot of great work, but it is important for legislators to hear from their constituents, their voters, people who can influence them. It's been like intimated on this panel, like being able to show that support, get those letters, see the social media activity. That's how people build their campaigns and get reelected. They're self-interested in that, so know that. For those who feel inspired and have the time to do it, it is important for us to sit at the tables where decisions are made. And that could be even potentially considering at some point in your own life elected office on some level. But it also can be all the various public boards, commissions, all of these things. It's vital that our industry is present. Otherwise, more often than not, it's forgotten. And many of you are inspired to seek substantive change in the world that we live in. And activism doesn't mean that you have to be out on the street marching every day, but devoting some of your time to causes that you care about in which you're prepared to go the extra mile and organize people, sit with people, be on the streets if that's your calling. I think it's important to consider the degree to which that's part of the work that you can bring into your everyday life as well. Again, that has been made easy. Some people, remark that Instagram and social media activism is not real activism, but it is a form. Again, all of these things have been made so much more accessible to us in today's environment. For those who don't have the time to very actively engage, we can all at least passively engage in the change that we seek to make in the world. So I encourage you to figure out your lane: policymaking, activism, advocacy.
So we want to be respectful of time. I think we have about 5 minutes left. We're going to take a look at the Mentimeter. If there are burning questions in the room, there are a couple of mics, and you can go and we'll have a couple of minutes. But if not, that's great too. So yeah, advocacy, what it most frequently looks like. Lots of online petitions or letters to policymakers. I'm super curious what other is.
Actually, if you clicked other, there's these microphones over here. We'd love to hear what you need.
Tell us what other is. I love that there's a lot of organizing happening. And then, meetings with elected officials. We need to get that, we need to keep the pressure on there. I know it's a lot of work, but it's incredibly valuable. Should we look at the next one?
Can we go back to the one before that, which was the word cloud of the issues that people work on? Oh, and this is great. People are continuing to fill it out.
I think we also have someone on the mic, maybe over here.
We can go there in a minute.
Okay, and then, we'll take.
Michael Alexander. I've spent 4 years in academia, and prior to that, 27 years in a mid-sized nonprofit. Had both kinds of experiences. For those of you on the stage who identified as middle age, I guess I have to identify as old, but I've been told there's no longer middle age. You're young, something cataclysmic happens, and then you're old, and I'm not yet old, so none of us are old. My wife spent 90% of her career as a gig artist. If it wasn't for my health plan, we for many years had to buy hers because it was cheaper to buy hers independently than to buy hers as a member of my family through my work. When it comes time for Social Security, she'll be better off taking half of mine than 100% of hers. I have a cousin living on $1,300 a month at 79 years of age because she too was a gig artist. So I encourage all of you to, and all of us in this room, to think about post-career issues and health issues as something that we have to bring to legislators. And there was one of the members of our field who I absolutely hated, but he did say one thing that was wise, and he said it's okay to add on to what David was saying. It's okay to run for office and lose, because it still gives us a chance to get our issues out in front of the public.
You guys want to respond to that, or? Hi, everyone. My name is Elisa Pearson. I present at Amherst College. I'm a performer as well. One thing I heard today that I want to lift up for us is reaching beyond the United States for inspiration and data. I think a lot of you, anyone who's lived outside of this country can attest to the fact that what we call normal doesn't have to be normal, that there are, I grew up in Austria, which is actually a democratic socialist country where I just watched artists get support from sort of in SVOG style. And the work that gets done isn't tied to donorship, it's just the artist expressing their art. So I think we can make a really strong case, and I just love the community on stage. I just want to shout out to all of you, like you've really gotten me excited, because Mr. Holland, when you were describing that journey, 1, 2, 3, start here, go to there. I've actually been on that journey, and I'm sort of at the third phase. I was at office, and now what? And I think that our future is to vision and to really explain the vision, because if SVOG taught us anything, it's that could just be a beginning for something like a whole level better. So thank you for your work.
I'd love to respond to that. And Jen, you were also talking about international examples, so maybe you have a few that you'd like to share, but I love that. Like, let's look at what works in other countries and just bring it here, or advocate for it to be here, just because if they've implemented it in other countries, they've really figured some things out. So this isn't just you being like, oh, can't we just be nicer to artists? This is like, can't we implement this well thought through plan that's been existing in other countries for a long time? In Canada, when two major radio stations merge, media consolidation, right? Like Clear Channel in the United States, I think used to be a billboard company. They owned 40 radio stations, and then at their peak, they owned 1,240 radio stations. So whenever that consolidation happens in Canada, the company has to set aside a certain amount of funds, because they recognize that consolidation of radio impacts the ability of new artists to develop, because the playlists consolidate. And so it's called the Star Maker Fund. Every time media companies merge in Canada, they put money into a pot. That money is used to develop young Canadian artists so they can compete against American artists. Avril Lavigne, like people who need access to capital to record and tour. Why couldn't we do that in the United States? We never asked for it. That's probably why we can't do it in the United States, but we could. I think that the European model in general for funding of artists is really great to look at. Another one that I'll look at is in Australia, when you paint something, if you're an Aboriginal artist and you've painted something and it gets sold right now in the United States, artists can't benefit from the resale of their work. But in Australia, Indigenous artists can, right? There's no reason why we couldn't implement something like that here, except we just never asked. So I wanted to open that. I know that we need to wrap, but Jen, I want to make space for you.
Tried in California, the Resale Royalty Act, and found unconstitutional, either by state law or federal law, I'm not sure.
Thank you. We should talk about that.
I think just my quick sort of addition to that is, I think it's really important looking at other models and then really identifying why we haven't adopted those models as a culture and as a society. And we're all trying to create different experiences, different energy, present different, we're pushing, right, always to create discourse and dialogue through what we do and how we present. And I think we really need to relook at how do we end up where we are? How are we engaging with artists and supporting them? We all want to have a way to live healthy. Our industry needs to be healthy. So I'm excited just to to be able to bust open some law, and all of us, right? We all operate from fear, so let's figure out how to challenge that. So I think there's just an amazing other models in other places. Canada is great because so many of us, I think, interact, and look, we're so close. And they're doing a lot of things different and better than we are, so let's challenge ourselves. It's smart.
You want to wrap us up, David? I'm getting lots of high signs from our boss. Even the manager on stage who needs to go to his next meeting. So
we're going to wrap up, but I want us to wrap up on a high note. Thank you for those who provided your comments and brought your voices into the space. Hopefully this has been inspiring for you. I think that there's great work that's been achieved in a crisis. It's time for us to look at our longer term vision and work toward that. Transformation doesn't happen overnight. All of the work that we're involved in, there's many generations, many generations before us that have been involved in the work that has gotten us to the world that we live in today, and it will take the efforts of many of us for many more generations to achieve the visions that we have for the long term. But I think that there's any reason to be optimistic, even in a divided context. I do think the next election is an opportunity, and this was mentioned briefly. I think it's important for us to develop our relationships across the entirety of the political spectrum, however difficult that might at times seem, because we do live in a democracy in which political tides change, ideological tides change, and we do need to have friends across the political spectrum and across our communities and society. So I encourage you to invest the time, as we've been talking about, in engaging with your elected officials, of course, but also with the concerns of individual artists and the concerns of the communities in which you live. And with that, we'll wrap up. Thank you very much.
Alicia, maybe we could put the last Mentimeter up, and then people can see the last question on the Mentimeter. We should put it up so people can see it on their way out.
thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for the watch. Oh, sure.
See, people are talking more.
Thank